So Ryan was elected to the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors in 2014 and reelected in 2018. Ryan is a former two-time mayor of the city of Santa Cruz. He is also an entrepreneur, author, and educator. He is the host of an Honorable Profession podcast. He was the co-founder of Next Space Co-working and Innovation, now owned by Pacific Workplaces, a lecturer on law and government at UC Santa Cruz, and co-author of The Rise of the Naked Economy, How to Benefit from the Changing Workplace. And he wrote Etched in Stone, Enduring Words from Our National Monument. If you haven't seen it, it's a very nice book. National Geographic published it in 2007. Ryan was selected by the Aspen Institute to be a Rodeo Fellow. Is that right, Rodeo? Rodale Fellow. Yeah, that didn't seem to look right. In public leadership as one of the nation's most promising young elected officials. A community hero by the Red Cross of Santa Cruz County, and Advocate of the Year by the United Way Santa Cruz County. On the Board of Supervisors, Ryan has created incentives to support affordable workforce housing, led the expansion of the Public Safety Program Community Partnership for Accountability, Connection, and Treatment, PACT, and brought forward a successful proposal for the county to stop doing business with big banks that pled guilty to felonies. So you all know Santa Cruz occasionally gets its name out there nationally, and these are the kinds of things that do it. Ryan built on the work of his predecessors to improve Twin Lakes beachfront access, repair boat roads and bikeways, and worked with the Santa Cruz County Clerk to make sure the postage is paid on all vote by mail ballots, so that stamps are never a barrier to voting. Ryan led the effort to establish a local nurse family partnership program as a Thrive by 3 fund to support families' health and educational outcomes. So, Ryan.
So thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and to everyone here and at home watching. When I begin to doubt the resiliency of our democracy, the fact that there are people here on a beautiful fall morning caring about what a county supervisor does, gives me a lot of heart and a lot of faith in the future. Let me just start by saying I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I really want to hear your questions and comments. I'd much rather talk about what you all want to talk about than what I think you want to talk about. But let me start by saying that the county level of government is a really weird level of government, right? I think if I go to my daughter's 6th grade class and I talk about the federal government and the president and Congress, Supreme Court, it's complicated but pretty self-explanatory. Then you sort of think of that as on a smaller level at the state level of government. And then if you skip over county government, I think it makes sense to people that you have a mayor and a city council and a school board. And it's pretty straightforward what the role of all those institutions are. And special boards, whether it's the water board, seems self-explanatory. The port commission around the harbor seems self-explanatory, right? Like all these things seem pretty clear. And then you get to the county level of government, and it becomes a little more, I think, unclear for folks about what does the county do, what's the county supervisor do, and what its role. And it's a pretty important role, but I want to talk through a little bit about what makes it, important at every level of government or across states, and then specifically in Santa Cruz County, how we're similar and different than other counties around the country. So first of all, let's talk about the fact that county level of government is really different wherever you are in the United States. In Texas and Kentucky, there's county judges that essentially run the county. They are elected. In the Northeast, county governments play a pretty important role because you have a lot of townships, so you don't have a lot of formalized cities. And so they are running, big areas and have relatively big budgets. Other smaller states, you don't even have a county level of government, state to local. Salt Lake County, you have a mayor of Salt Lake County and you have a mayor of Salt Lake City, and sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't, but you have that form of government. In California, the 58 counties in California, everyone except for San Francisco, and San Francisco gets set aside because They're a city county government and they're San Francisco, so they have to do things differently than everybody else all the time. But everywhere, the other 57 counties in California all have 5 supervisors. So it's pretty amazing the span of those supervisors. So if you're a supervisor in LA County, each supervisor represents 2.5 million people. They have 40 people on their personal staff. They are controlling billions and billions of dollars. People leave Congress or the state legislature to run for supervisor. It is an enormous and powerful job. If you go to Alpine County, which I think has 1,200 people, each supervisor is much more like a volunteer basis, and each supervisor represents about 250 people, and has a much smaller infrastructure, obviously, no staff, just a few meetings a month, and tries to keep things going. Santa Cruz County falls somewhere in the middle from a population point of view on that chart. So there are 5 supervisors in Santa Cruz County. My supervisorial district runs essentially from the harbor through most of the city of Santa Cruz, then up to the San Mateo County line. So including Davenport, Bonnie Doon, and Swanton, that area on the north coast. My colleagues in the 5th district, Bruce McPherson, he starts essentially at the town clock and goes north through San Lorenzo Valley to the Santa Clara County line. Supervisor Koenig, Manu Koenig, starts at the harbor and he runs also up all the way to the summit. Supervisor Friend represents Aptos and part of Capitola and runs essentially to the borders of Watsonville, and Supervisor Caput represents the city of Watsonville. This is really important to know for a couple reasons. One is there are really 2 different kinds of supervisors in Santa Cruz County. So in my district, the 3rd district, and in the 4th district in Watsonville, by and large, about 92% of my constituents are represented by the city council in the city of Santa Cruz. So when there's a barking dog, when trash doesn't get picked up, there's a pothole, there's a park, there's a proposal to build something, fires called, clean water coming in, dirty water going out, those folks are all turning to the city, appropriately so, to talk about those services and what they want from their local government. The same thing goes for the 4th district down in Watsonville. If you are my colleagues in the 5th district, the 1st and the 2nd district, you are essentially spending your time being the mayor of that area, of Live Oak, of Soquel, of Aptos. There are no cities in that area. You are worried about barking dogs and potholes and parks and roads and fire and police. And so there's a little bit of a tension that goes on within the Board of Supervisors because those offices are very busy working on constituent issues, working on just sort of the day-to-day levels of government, while the 3rd and the 4th districts are cooperating with their cities, hopefully, but are working on also sort of our regional efforts or our countywide efforts, because we aren't spending our time, for the most part, responding to thousands and thousands of constituent calls until there's a fire, but there's more on that later for what that means. So, so there's really 2 parts to the job. And when you think about who's responsible and who's elected and what their accountability is, the 2 parts way heavier than others. So the first part is for everyone who lives in the unincorporated area. That means in our county, San Lorenzo Valley, Bonnie Doon, Corralitos, Aptos, Soquel, Live Oak, more than half of our population, we are the local government. So we're doing everything a city council or a mayor may do in those places. The second part of the job is really organizing countywide services. So that's running the jails, the detention centers, running mental health programs, public health programs, the workforce development programs, the safety net programs. We're really trying to provide, the basic resources that are countywide. If we had a county hospital, we would be running a county hospital. This is where it's really, Santa Cruz is a little bit different than other counties. If you go over to Santa Clara County, 96% of the county is represented in cities. So essentially they have no constituent function, no local government function. They are just running countywide programs. Same with San Mateo County. Santa Cruz County, by having more than half its population outside of cities, it spends much more time of its time and budget and resources being a local government, deciding what happens in Live Oak with housing or business, trying to put in sidewalks and repair roads and all those things. That makes it interesting from a perspective of trying to shape the way daily life for half the population, more than half the population of the county of Santa Cruz. It makes it extremely challenging, frankly, to address many of the countywide issues, because my colleagues and my budget, we are, unlike Santa Clara County, unlike San Mateo County, we are put in a choice of, do you want to pave a road in Live Oak? Do you want to provide a park in Aptos? Or do you want to spend that money on a countywide need, homelessness, mental health, other things? And for three of my colleagues, that's a very real choice, because their constituents want their road paved and they want those kinds of services. For me, in the 3rd district, I'm worried about the folks in Bonnie Doon and Davenport, but that's a very small percentage of my overall electorate, small percentage of the population. So I'm much more focused on those county services. But there's a real tension there in sort of how you provide services and what your focus is. So I should also say that through an accident of Prop 13 in Santa Clara County, they get about 43 cents of every property tax dollar. Santa Cruz County gets about 13 cents of every property tax dollar. So you will see different counties resourced completely differently, even though we are neighboring counties, even though we may have the same issues. We have a fraction of the budget, and we have far more constituents who need day-to-day services than other communities and other counties our size. So it really is, there's all counties across the country are very different in how they're shaped and governed. In California, you have very different apples and oranges in counties, different resources available, different priorities, and different really roles for county supervisor. From my perspective, the county has to wear those two hats, even though they're sometimes in conflict with one another, or even sometimes they make difficult choices. And nothing's been put that more in stark relief than the last 3 years of global pandemic, where we are the primary health coordinator. So we are organizing testing, tracking, tracing, quarantines, trying to respond in a public health way to the biggest public health crisis of the last century. And at the same time, we also had fires 2 years ago, which occurred in the unincorporated area, and which we're trying to not only provide emergency services and response to those folks, but we are also trying to help them now rebuild and provide basic government services to people who've been impacted dramatically by a natural disaster. So while my first 4 or 5 years on the board, I was really focused on countywide efforts, and we tried to put forward initiatives on homelessness, on crime, on early childhood interventions. Those were really the areas that I focused on, and I'm happy to talk more about what worked and what didn't, and why it works and why it didn't. The last 3 years have been much more focused, as you might imagine, on the public health response, the epidemic, and pandemic, and then also on fire and constituent response than I ever would have. I already spent a lot of time as your 3rd district supervisor in Bonnie Doon and Davenport, disproportionately so for the number of people that are my constituents. But as you might imagine, when you have 450 homes burned down in my district and 450 homes burned down Supervisor McPherson's district, that is an enormous effort to try to help people rebuild and respond and recover from that traumatic incident. And so the job has been very different in the last 3 years than it was in the first 5 years. Overall, I believe that county government can be a really essential role in supporting cities, in providing, system-wide. In general, we don't want to have every jurisdiction, whether it's the cities of Capitola and Santa Cruz and Watsonville, Scotts Valley, we don't want everyone to be running in their own directions and creating their own priorities. So to the extent that we can convene and set broader priorities, scale resources, I always remind people the county of Santa Cruz is about the size of a third of the city of San Jose. So we don't need as much layers of government between us. We could be more collaborative, more efficient, find more economies of scale, respond. And over time, I think we've done that. We've seen some fire departments merge and share services. We've done better collaborations, I think, with the different cities around homelessness response or emergency response. Certainly in the pandemic, we all coordinated, and in the fires, we all coordinated. So it can play a really important role as a convener. The county has no ability to regulate water in Santa Cruz County. Each water district has its own powers, but we can convene people to try to set goals, set policies, and try to work collaboratively. The other thing we can do is do a better job of directly providing services and programs that we're meant to do, whether it's supporting low-income first-time moms, whether it's supporting the elderly, whether it's trying to support people who are experiencing homelessness or mental health crisis. And over the past couple of years, we spent a lot of time trying to scale and increase those services to meet the ever-demanding need that we're seeing across this county from a lot of different populations, with each population needing a specific response and a specific approach, and trying to tailor those programs so that we can meet the people where they are, learn what we do well, adjust and change over time. One of the things I'm proudest of is when I got to the county, there was no strategic plan. There were no real outcomes that we were all working towards, that we all aligned to. Now, if you go to the Vision Santa Cruz County page, we have 186 goals every year. We tell you exactly what we're trying to do. We tell you whether we're trying to get there or, I mean, we're all always trying to get there. We're telling you whether we are there, whether we're not there, whether we're going to meet that goal. And it's allowed us to be much more transparent and clear to folks about exactly what we're doing and how. I think you saw the same thing with COVID response, where you could see on the website we set up, you could see how the number of cases increasing, decreasing, how we were doing against other counties in comparison to similar counties, whether we were lagging or leading in terms of our COVID response and reductions. And so we've been much more data informed, but it's been much more outcome driven and much more responsive. And I think we're building a culture now at the county where that is now baked into the governing systems so that people can be more clear. The county as a whole is a very big organization. It's about 2,400 employees. So this year was the first year we hit $1 billion budget. So it is a large institution to change. To the extent you want to do anything, unlike the city and my colleagues here at the city you could sort of decide you want to make a little turn, and it was not easy, but you could turn the wheel. At the county, you are hanging on the steering wheel, kicking, trying to turn a battleship over time. It's just a big institution. The other part of it is that really we are a state organism. So state dollars flow through us for mental health, for substance abuse, for welfare, to work, for other programs. We don't really have, it's in our budget, and it makes that number, our annual budget number, really big. We don't really have control over those programs. The state mandates you are going to provide programs in the following ways. You are going to check these 20 boxes and these 50 boxes. So the money comes through, but in many ways we are a pass-through organization. The other thing that makes it a little challenging is when you're on the city council, you hire a city manager and you hire a police chief, and all the department heads are accountable to either the city manager or to the council directly. At the county, as you are often reminded, you're 5 supervisors, but the sheriff is independently elected, the treasurer is independently elected, the clerk is independently elected, and they are very clear that they are not accountable to the Board of Supervisors. They are accountable to the broader electorate. In our county, because it's small and we work pretty collaboratively and we share values, it largely hasn't been an issue. If you go to LA, if you look at LA right now, the supervisors and the sheriff are in an outright war where he's sending search warrants and search teams into supervisors' homes. They're threatening arrests, they're cutting budgets. Similar things happen down in Monterey County. So it's a much more diffuse power system in counties. So if I decide I want to head and do something new on public safety in the city, if I can get 4 votes on the city council and the city manager to agree, you can sort of head in that direction. At the county, you have to convince an independent elected official that he should or shouldn't participate in that program, and then provide the money to do so. So it's a much more difficult, nuanced job. I will say, I mean, I think the big difference from when I was on the city council is, you know, you sit at the city council and most of us had full-time jobs and we had no staff, and you're responding to constituents and you're reading your own packets and all these other things. It can be an overwhelming job, but much more of a citizen legislature job. In Santa Cruz County, you do get a salary, you do have 2 staff, and that really increases your capacity. The 3rd district, which I'm, I've been fortunate to represent for, 7 years and 11 months, has a long tradition because we don't have as many constituents of really driving countywide policy. So my predecessors did real transformative work in terms of environmental protection, especially on the North Coast, and protecting farmland. We also had Marty Wormhout, who totally revised our juvenile justice system in the county, and we became a national model for juvenile justice. We have my dad did a lot of work around mental health issues and scaling those sorts of things. And then I've really focused my time on early childhood interventions, supporting moms and babies in those first couple of years of life, which are critical to the long-term success of the children. The 85% of a child's brain is developed in the first few years of life. The positive and negative experiences in those times have a lifelong impact. And so we have invested millions of dollars in public health nurses and all kinds of other programs in saying, from the moment that low-income first-time mom finds out she's pregnant, we will have somebody there to meet with you weekly until the child turns 2 or 3 or 4. We will get you enrolled in Head Start. We will teach you about nutrition. We'll get you signed up for food benefits and CalFresh. We'll ensure you have Medicare coverage. We'll do literacy programs. We will do everything we can. We'll give you, we start investing from the moment the child's born in a college scholarship account for every child in Santa Cruz County, saying that this county believes in you and believes in your future, and will reward you when you do your healthy child visits and other visits. So we have, I think, put in a generationally transformational program that will pay benefits for years to come. The studies show that the kids who start life with that kind of support are 70% less likely to end up in the criminal justice system, are likely to have, the moms and the kids are likely to earn 40% more money over their careers. They're more likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to go to college. They're less likely to end up in the emergency room or in the child protective system. And so we are trying to make that investment and really shift money upstream. There's a lot of downstream challenges that we need to face on a day-to-day basis. But if we can shift the money upstream, I believe that it'll be the biggest effort to create equity and opportunity for the kids of Santa Cruz County in its history. So it's an exciting program that I think will hopefully continue on long beyond my tenure and well into the future, and will have an impact that we can all see for generations to come. I'd like to open it up to any and all questions that folks have about the county, and I'll start with Carol Fuller. Yeah, so the question, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, how many newborns were served in the last year? I believe it's 120 newborns. So we have 5 public health nurses. They each have about 25 moms and babies on their case list. and they work through. And the great thing about it is there's a program I learned about and brought to Santa Cruz County. The great thing about it is the public health nurses are not just there for the health parts, they're for the support. They're helping them find jobs, or getting them enrolled at Cabrillo, getting the moms enrolled at Cabrillo, or making sure that they feel supported, or when there's a crisis, they're getting counseling in for them. And so, you know, as a father of now a little bit older kids, but I remember those early days. They are not easy. They're especially not easy if you are a low-income first-time mom. Our low-income first-time moms are often 18, 19 years old, Latina, live in South County. And so the more that we can do to support those moms and the kids, the longer term benefits we're going to see. Yes. Thank you.
Did you give us an overall where we stand right now in the county city on the homeless issue?
Sure. So the question was where we stand on homelessness. This has been by far the most frustrating, heartbreaking aspect of my job. Every day I woke up and tried to look at interventions around the country and the state that we could try. And every day you could see it getting worse. So let me give you the honest truth, which I think is not hard to hear, which is hard to hear, and then maybe some future reasons for hope. Okay, so here the honest truth is there's about 3,000 unsheltered people in Santa Cruz County. I always want to make clear that when we talk about that population, we are actually talking about a lot of different populations. So you have farm workers in South County that are unsheltered. You have children who are in our elementary schools and high schools who are unsheltered. You have unsheltered Cabrillo students and UCSC students. You have people who are experiencing mental health crises, drug and alcohol crises. You have transition age youth coming out of the foster system. And the key thing to remember about that is that each one of those requires a totally different solution than the other ones do, right? And so, for example, 2 years ago, I set the goal that we would have no more unsheltered families with children in Santa Cruz County. We have brought that down. We've brought the number down by 94%, and we've almost. Well, I think we're going to get to we can get to 0 this year. That is in contrast to what you're seeing with large encampments and other impacts around our parks and open spaces. So here's the challenging thing. During COVID, the county spent about $130 million and housed more than half of the unsheltered population in Santa Cruz County. We stood up shelters and turned over best halls and rented out hotel room and did everything we could. As on a per capita basis, Santa Cruz County did better sheltering homeless people than any other county in California, and probably than any other county in the country. We did all that, solved half the problem, which is a number that if you had told me pre-COVID that we could do, I would have said that's a great aspiration, but totally impossible. And as we spent $130 million, as we had 6 hotels, 2 veterans halls, all kinds of shelter, the problem got worse, right? And then as COVID ended, the federal government, all that funding went away. We lost the 6 hotels, we lost the shelters, and now we're back to having an average of about 400, 450 shelter beds a night. So when we talk about trying to address homelessness, we need to be clear that right now we can help about 12% of the population. If we increase taxes, if we put shelters into every neighborhood around Santa Cruz County, we can maybe get to 15 or 16% of the population. One of the challenges of Santa Cruz County is that we have an urban services line. So we've done a great job of creating a green belt in rural areas. That means that there is no industrial space. There is no space that's not next to a school, a park, a house. So when we talk about creating shelter, we are always going to be putting it into someone's neighborhood, and that those neighbors will always have deep concerns about that. So that is how hard and big the challenge is. That challenge is so big because of the economics of housing that we're seeing, a complete failure of the mental health and criminal justice systems in the state of California, an opioid epidemic. We are pushing against giant forces, and we're a small county trying to do that. So that's how hard the problem is. If we can get from 12% to 16%, it'll be a major victory, and very hard to do politically, economically, and otherwise. So that's the bad news. The good news is that I believe that we are in subpopulations making a big difference. We've seen a reduction in families with kids of 94%. I think we saw a reduction in transition age youth, back kids, people 18 to 24 of 60%. We had a little blip of an increase in veterans homelessness, but actually over time, we've gone from, I think, almost 400 veterans who are experiencing homelessness to less than 150 veterans who are experiencing homelessness, and trying to create more. I think we have a number of shelter opportunities that are either online or coming online. The county, when I got there, had on its best days would partner with the cities on homelessness. On its worst days was really hands off. We now have a director of housing and health who's a doctor. He is coordinating a county-wide response, working with the cities. We have staff, we have those numbers that are pointed to every year of how good a job we are doing in providing services. We're coordinating across the nonprofits and the local governments in order to respond. So we're creating much better systems and data where we will be able to do it, and we're creating more opportunities for shelter. But we just need to be aware of how hard and big this problem is, and what it's going to take from this community if we really want to solve it. Lastly, and I think it's really important to remember this, is, when we talk about those 3,000 people, almost all of us are thinking about the 200 or 300 people that are the most visible, most impactful, most everything. That is about 10% of the population. Many people experiencing homelessness are working 2 jobs and living out of their vans, right? They need a security deposit. They need a first and last month's rent, and they can actually be helped. If we can create more affordable housing through the library project, through other projects, we will give them a path into stability and stability and to a better life. The 200 people who are creating enormous amounts of impact are by far the most difficult, the most expensive, the most resistant to serve. And so that to me, we have to separate it out and be clear in our minds about which population we want to serve and how we want to serve it. So what you saw during COVID was we were helping more than 1,000 people, 1,400 people who, and in a really profound way, stabilizing them during a big economic and scary health time. But you saw visible homelessness increase for that reason. So we all have to be aware of, whenever people are like, what are you doing to end homelessness? I always ask, like, which homelessness? Kids and families, people with 2 jobs, people in the downtown streets team, people who are in encampments and addicted to drugs, people with mental health issues, the elderly. We need to be really clear about which population we're trying to address and how.
And I'll restrict myself to one follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
The cost, I'm referring to the encampment at San Lorenzo Benchland. Who's funding the cost of that cleanup and the bathroom maintenance and the ongoing expense to redo the park?
Yeah, so the question was, who's funding the sort of remediation of the park, and then we're also offering every person their shelter. So the short answer is the city is funding sort of the physical expense of the cleanup, the security, the bathrooms, those sorts of things. The county is down there doing outreach through our health programs, signing people up for Medi-Cal and Section 8 and doing the health outreach. And the city is primarily using one-time $14 million it got from the state to help fund that and other efforts. But it's an extraordinarily addressing homelessness is extraordinarily expensive on a per person basis. And in Santa Cruz County, there's just not an easy solution for where to put them.
Well, first, thank you for the comprehensive talk. We're taking this, and I'm gonna share it with my teaching class at UCSC on Santa Cruz politics and history. Definitely gonna share your talk with them because I don't need to be flattering, it's really true. The most comprehensive talk I've ever heard about what the county does. So thanks you.
Thank you. For those at home, Mike Rotkin is been very complimentary about the comprehensive nature of this talk. I'll take credit for it.
But my question, there's a lot of discussion about at the state level, should we be forcing homeless people into programs against their will? You know, I don't want to go inside, I don't want to program the rules, I don't, whatever. In some ways, to me, that seems a little premature because right now, we have people who are asking to be in programs.
Yeah. Like
mental health programs, alcohol, rehabilitation programs. But these programs have something like, correct me if I'm wrong, a year-long waiting list. So you get somebody who's got a serious drug habit, for example, or an alcohol problem, and they have a moment of truth. They wake up and they go, my life is terrible. Things are not good for me. I'd like to be in a program. I join a locked program that requires me to address my issues. That's great. We're so happy to hear it. We'll put you on a 1 year long waiting list. By the time you get to a year later, that person may or may not still be interested in that program. So it seems to me before we have discussions about, should we be forcing people in the end to do something that they don't want to do? How about the people who would be willing to do something that would make a difference to them and to our community? And what I'm wondering is, what do you think the prospects are for getting funding from the state? Because I don't think it can come from county taxes. It could be part of it, but it can't all come from there. That would allow us to have a waiting list that's like 2 days.
Yeah.
Let's be, realistic, a month or something, rather than saying, we'll come back to you in a year and offer you what you're asking for. So, is there any hope for this, or it's all over? There's no way we can address this.
Sure. So the question is that the governor and the state legislature recently passed something called the CARE Accords, which is essentially creates potential for the justice system to force people into treatment or jail if they are sort of chronic offenders and they've been through the process and they haven't responded. And Mike Rotkin was pointing out that right now putting those folks and coercing or mandating that they go into treatment when we have people who are ready to go to treatment and there's a long wait to access either mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment or beyond. And sort of like, shouldn't we have more resources to provide, at least start with the people who want it, and then we can get to people who don't want it. So I'm going to give a nuanced answer because I think it's such a complex topic that it deserves a complex answer. So the short answer is we, as Santa Cruz County, is one of 6 counties in California that created essentially a right to get substance abuse treatment. And so it's an entitlement like Medicare or Medicaid, Medi-Cal. We were doubling capacity right before the pandemic. The pandemic then blew that up, as it does so many things, because you can't have treatment facilities that are crowded with people during a pandemic. That capacity is beginning to come back online as we're able to staff up. So what was a very long wait will hopefully get to be a much shorter rate. And to the extent that people are ready for treatment or want treatment, they should be able to access it hopefully much more pretty quickly within in a reasonable amount of time. Treatment on demand is what we're working towards. One of the biggest challenges of this is that we often spend $300,000 to get somebody into a residential treatment facility, and then into a halfway house, and then they graduate into homelessness, and not surprisingly, because there's no housing stock, and then not surprisingly, they begin to use again to deal with because they're surrounded by other folks, or because they're on the streets and trying to keep warm and other things. So what we do need to do is create a continuous pipeline where people get through treatment, they can get into some housing, whether it's in Santa Cruz or outside of Santa Cruz County, because it's an enormous investment of time and money and people's commitment to it, and we need to not throw it away by having people get back into homelessness. The care courts. So let me just say this: I don't think it's wrong that the governor and legislature have identified. And when I was talking about those 200 people that are having huge impacts, there are 5 people downtown that can have an impact for every business, for everyone visiting downtown. And we could house 500 people. And unless we house those 5, business owners, visitors, residents will say, this system's broken, you're not doing anything. So I understand the governor's frustration and the desire to say, because those people who are causing that big impact are outreach to every day, several times a day. They are asked, can I help you? What can we do? Can we get you, health treatment? Can we get you back on your meds? Can we get you shelter for tonight? And these people refuse and refuse and refuse for either as a result of their mental health, as a result of their desire to keep using, as a result of not wanting to abide by rules. When every 50 people, I believe, that the city is offering shelter to at the benchlands, less than half are taking it. And so when it's available. So there is a subset of the population that none of the current systems are designed to address and help. And so I understand the state's desire to create a mechanism to address those people. However, the point that I think you make is the best one, which is without creating new facilities, we don't want to send them to jail, fine, but they need a locked detox facility. They need a locked mental health facility until they can stabilize again, and they give themselves a break, give the community a break, everything else. The state isn't providing any of that. So what the state is doing is saying to the counties, you need to address these most challenging, most service resistant people with the systems you have. And so the systems we have are already overburdened. So what that means is that the governor and the state legislature can say, we tried, we told the counties to do this, and the counties have failed, but so they're going to relieve themselves of blame. They're not really fixing the problem, which if they want to fix the problem, they need to create 50,000 to 100,000 locked beds across the state of California that are not jail, that are treatment centered, but that tell people like, we can give you treatment, we can give you shelter, we can give you all these things. What you cannot do is keep using methamphetamine in our parks. Like, you just can't do that. So you can go to jail, you can go to treatment, but you can't do that. And right now, without those locked facilities, it's a recipe to just keep moving people through a system without really making a change. Yes.
I noticed that there are among the homeless people some older people, and to me they are really the most the saddest ones, because a lot of them are like elder orphans, and they don't have, for instance, any structure, family or such as that. And where I live, it is in Cedar Complex, and there is a 3-year waiting list for people that need help. So I just wonder if the county is doing anything there to improve, for instance, the abilities to fill in.
Yeah, so the question is a good one, which is, among one of those subpopulations of homelessness that people see are, seniors, for whom the safety net is broken down. They may have lost their housing, they may be experiencing mental health or physical challenges. So Santa Cruz County, I believe, is aging 4 times faster than the state of California as a whole. We're getting old very quickly, myself included. And that creates a really difficult burden and change on all of our health systems and our transportation systems and everything else, because it's just a different need, right? And so it's interesting because we have in South County a very young Latino population that has one set of needs. And then in North County, we have a much older population that needs a different set of needs. And we're trying to balance. So the short answer is we are trying to create more senior housing, more care facilities and other things. They're extremely expensive to create and provide, and the amount of funding that we get back for each person does not cover the cost. So it's a structural problem that we have. And then also, to your point, because I know this because I've personally worked on some seniors who are experiencing homelessness, that the same challenge that we talked about with a homeless population of essentially being voluntary for people to get treatment and to move into housing, the same thing goes with seniors. So I've had seniors who are literally missing appendages, sleeping in the cold during the winter, and I am trying to get them into shelter, identify shelter, and they refuse to go. And there's almost nothing you can do in the state of California to force people into treatment. We've expanded the number of what we call conservators because it's a growing need, but the conservation process is a very high bar. It's a very long one. It's an expensive one. And if people are able enough to stand in court and say, I don't want that for whatever reason, there's nothing we can do to force them into treatment. And so this is when I talked about, like, at some level, the cities and the counties are really working in a broken system where we can add resources and pull here, but until the state of California reckons with this, you know, a very difficult civil liberties challenge of how much can the state force an individual to do something against their will, we are going to continue to see these impacts in our community.
I was wondering, I remember when, I think it was Reagan closed the mental health facilities. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of remember when that happened, when I didn't hear about those things because there wasn't any.
When he was governor, he did that.
So did we do that with an initiative process? Was it voted on?
No. So the question was, Governor Reagan closed the mental health facilities when he was governor in the late 60s. And it was sort of a perfect storm of conservatives who didn't want to shrink the size of government and liberals who had concerns about, you know, one flew over the cuckoo's nest, concerns about people being, you know, locked up just because they were dissenting and or whatever reason as counterculture grew. The short answer is what was supposed to happen was you were supposed to close those, and then the money was supposed to flow from those institutions into community-based mental health programs, halfway houses, community support, and other things. As often happens, those institutions were closed and the money just never came. So our mental health director, who came from New Hampshire, he was the New Hampshire state mental health director before he became Santa Cruz County's mental health director, is like, when he got here, he was like, this is insane. This is a crazy, pun intended, way to run a mental health system, because there's just no support, no ability to get people the treatment they need. And from my perspective, inhumane. We manage in California to get people just enough to subsist on the streets in misery and not enough to improve their lives or reduce their impact on the community. And so, yeah, and the hard part is though that in order to fix it, you need to both wrestle with the hard civil liberties challenge and provide a ton of money, and where you're going to site those facilities is going to be a fight every step of the way across the whole state. So it's not an easy approach. Yes.
Hey, this is from the chat, this is Laura Lee Martin. She says, you started by stating the imbalance in funding returned to the counties from property tax revenues, an artifact of Prop 13. Short of turning over Prop 13, what other approaches has the county tried to equalize that funding inequity?
So the question was, I talked about how we get 13 cents of every dollar of property tax. Other counties get 43 cents of every dollar. We have tried many times to advocate. The hard part is, yeah, as I said, there are 58 counties in California, which means if you change the formula, some counties are going to win and some counties are going to lose, or the state's going to win and the state's going to lose. And Santa Cruz County is not big enough to swing. The state is very focused on what LA County wants, San Francisco County wants, the big counties want, or what the very small rural counties want. Us medium counties don't get a lot of attention or love from the state. So what the county has done is, I think, something that is relatively recent is trying to increase our tax base. The county was not focused on economic development. We had no one when I got elected doing any economic development. And so now we are approving hotels and small businesses and cannabis, commercial cannabis operations, and trying to increase our tax base through other mechanisms so that we can provide more of the needed services. Now, as I said, when those new dollars come in, there's a strong advocacy from 3 members of the board to get those right into the districts to provide sidewalks and roads and parks and things that people need, more sheriffs and fire protection and other things. And then there will be the 2 members of the board who represent the cities who will say, no, we need to for more homeless funding or mental health funding. And so it's going to be a push and pull with those new dollars as they come in.
This is not actually a question, but a quick comment. Another issue has to do with the possibility of not necessarily overturning Prop 13, because it provides tax protection for residents, but a split tax roll that would restore the previous tax system on commercial and industrial property, which has been before the voters and lost once. Maybe, again, problems getting worse and not having enough money. That might be a way to actually get it. That's a significant amount of money. Over half the properties in the state are not residential, they're commercial or industrial, and that might raise enough money to actually make a difference in this kind of struggle. So is the county doing anything to lobby the state or legislators or others to try to get, again, voters, hopefully the state voters will probably control this.
Yeah.
But is the county doing anything to try and push that kind of an option, changing the state tax structure where they can bring in double the taxes available or something like that?
So there was so the question is that there was an effort, and there still continues to be an effort to separate out commercial properties from residential properties for the purposes of Prop 13, so that you didn't want, the reason Prop 13 passed is you didn't want people facing significantly higher property tax bills as they were on fixed incomes and other things. And so that maybe if you shifted to the commercial properties, there's an ability to absorb that in a way a family can't, and that it would generate new revenue. So the county supported it, I think, like all the jurisdictions did, when it was put before the voters that ultimately failed. The hard part in the county unincorporated area is, unlike the cities, we just have so much less commercial property than most. I mean, the fundamental issue here is that Live Oak and parts of SoCal were really supposed to be annexed into the city of Santa Cruz, because as everyone involved in local government knows, essentially you lose money on every house. And what you do is you make it up in commercial properties. And so Live Oak is heavily residential without much commercial. So it's a hard area that, the city sort of rightfully so didn't want it, after Prop 13. So much of the unincorporated county areas just doesn't have the big commercial that, that the cities do. So it would benefit us. I think it would benefit us less than some of the cities.
Unless it went to the state and then they gave them more money to do it, all of it.
Yeah, unless they give money to the state. In my experience, the state somehow manages to never quite get that money down. They're sitting on a $40 billion surplus and somehow we can't find funding for, to buy a hotel to create more homeless shelters. Been a little frustrating. Yes.
One more question from the chat is from Deborah Feldstein. She says, can you discuss the role of the university in the rental housing crisis and how to address it?
Sure. So the question is, discuss the role of the university in the rental housing crisis. So, yes, the university is a tremendous benefit to this community, and economically and otherwise. It doesn't help generally the tax rolls, but it certainly helps create a vibrant economy and quality of life for all of us. To the extent that UCSC grows and doesn't house the students on campus, that puts enormous pressure on our housing market, and has always done so. When 12 years ago, we negotiated an agreement with the university that they would house 2/3 of their new enrollment on campus, and they did. And it did take some what would make our housing crisis currently bad would have made it essentially catastrophic had they not done that. With this new plan for them to grow by additional 10,000 students, the city and the county have asked, and we've gone in negotiations and said, we need you to house 100% of your new enrollment on campus, plus some faculty and staff. The housing crisis is getting worse. If you add 3,000 or 5,000 more students, mostly the city of Santa Cruz, but also to the county, like our housing market cannot absorb that in a reasonable way when you can rent out a house to 5 UCSC students paying all $1,500 a month, or a family who can pay $3,500 a month. Landlords will pick the 5, 8, 10 students in a house, and it creates quality of life concerns, water concerns, public safety concerns, etc. So far, the university has not been willing, has been willing to say that that's what they want to do, but hasn't been willing to say that's what we will do. So currently the city and the county are in a lawsuit with the university around this issue that I hope we will be able to win or negotiate, and they will house those students. I should say, as somebody who teaches on campus, I mean, I can talk about it from the community's point of view, but it's also from the student's point of view. If you are telling people that they are getting a 4-year education, and when they show up, they cannot find housing, or they are homeless, or I have some students who are commuting in from Reading and Lodi and other places, and sleeping on their friends' couches for 2 nights a week, and then driving home. That is not offering people access to higher education. So even if the university doesn't care about the community, they should care about the quality of life and their ability of their students to learn, to access classes, and to provide the facilities they need to succeed. So one hopes that the legislature, with this surplus, could solve a lot of these problems by building like another 100,000 units of university housing one time, and then it's paid for ongoing. The maintenance is paid for ongoing by the rents. So it would seem that would be an easy way for the state to help address part of the state's housing crisis, is to step up and fulfill their responsibility. I think the UCSC administration largely agrees, but we need the state to do that, and we need the university to commit to that. They won't enroll people if they don't have housing for them. Yeah.
One last question.
Sure.
From the chat. What's next for you?
So the question is, what's next for me? That's my wife's question also. The short answer is, I am going to continue to teach at UCSC, which I've done for 18 years and I love doing. I'm working on a book about the Skokie case, which is a famous now historical case about the intersection of free speech and hate speech that is only becoming more relevant in today's world. And so I'm gonna have more time for that. And then I'm gonna be working with some companies and organizations and helping them navigate, you know, government and legislation and going everywhere. I'm not going anywhere. I have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, and my wife runs Del Williams downtown, and we have family here. So I will be here. I will be of help. I will not be running for any office, but I will be around to help those who do. And I'll also be coaching, I think, a lot of kids' basketball teams, hopefully, in the near future.
Yeah, great.
So, thank you, Ryan, for coming. That was amazingly informing. I'm probably gonna listen to parts of it again. That was good. And I think maybe the Democratic Women's Club could write a letter to the governor saying, cut loose some of that 40 million.
Billion, yeah.
Billion, right, yeah, okay. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all today.